The movie begins by showing a beautiful woman named Kim Sunjo, a beautiful woman from a rich descent who already has a husband named Myung-so. Myung-so is a director at a company called Lauren Industry, a company engaged in fashion and art. The company was founded by Sunjo's mother Mrs. Kim. Told that initially Myung-so was not a rich man, his life changed drastically after marrying Sunjo and being appointed director by his own in-laws. Even though Myung-so is her son-in-law, Mrs. Kim has never given him special treatment and considers Myung-so the same as other employees. Since marriage, Sunjo no longer works at her mother's company and wants to focus on being a housewife and take care of her two children named Taehi and Taehyung. Even though like that, Sunjo occasionally often helps her husband to complete quite heavy work, considering that Sunjo used to be very reliable in the Lauren company. One day Myung-so was seen on a business trip to launch their company's latest brand. While on the plane, a woman suddenly burst into Myung-so's toilet, and this is what happened. The woman's name is Yeon Mira. Mira is Myung-so's mistress and they have been having an affair for a long time. Myung-so's love for Mira is very sincere, even he really wants to make Mira his legal wife, but because of the position he now gets thanks to Sunjo, he has not been able to marry Mira legally. On that day was their anniversary of dating. Mira said if that day was their last date, because after that Mira and Myung-so will live their respective lives. As a gift for a memento, Myung-so invited Mira to come to the launch event of the company's latest brand Lauren tomorrow, and he promised to give a surprise to Mira. Lauren Company is a very famous fashion company in the city of Seoul, which produces clothes, bags and also luxury shoes. On the day of the launch, Myung-so introduced a luxury shoe called Victoria. Victoria shoes made all the investors very amazed and even thought that the Lauren company would return to its heyday with that shoe. It turns out that the person who made the Victoria shoe design was Mira, which makes Mira now even more dear to Myung-so. Thanks to the success of the design, Myung-so also whispered to Mira, if now and then Mira will remain the queen in his heart. At the same time also Sunjo secretly came to the event to help her husband, and she came right after Mira left.
Surprise.
That night Myung-so said goodbye to Sunjo to meet his client and told Sunjo to go home first, but it turned out that Myung-so went to see Mira and they celebrated the success of the night by making out. The next day Sunjo decided to take a trip alone to an island. On her way she accidentally met Mira on the ship, and the chance meeting happened for the second time and even the third time.
이 섬에 전설이 있대요. 누구나 자기 사랑은.
When going home, the car rented by Sunjo ran out of gas. Mira, who accidentally passed by the road, then accompanied Sunjo to wait for the car agent to come, but unfortunately until the night was getting late the car agent rented by Sunjo did not come, which finally, although embarrassed, Sunjo went home with Mira's delivery. The next day, as a reward for the success of Victoria's shoes, Myung-so gave an apartment in Seoul for Mira. The apartment was not far from Myung-so's house so that he could easily meet Mira to make out. Sunjo is a socialite woman who joined a club of rich women. At the club, Sunjo accidentally saw Mira, who had just joined the socialite club. Then in another place shown a man named Jungwon. Jungwon is Sunjo's younger brother who is now in Italy to take care of Lauren's company problems. Besides Jungwon, Sunjo also has a younger sister named Yoonjo, but now Yoonjo has died due to excessive stress due to loving someone else's husband. Back to the Queen's Club. In the socialite club there is a woman who knows the background of Mira, who is a mistress. Even so hateful, the old woman also deliberately spilled drinks on Mira. Sunjo, who remembered her sister who died because she loved someone's husband, then defended and helped Mira. Even because of that, now the relationship between Sunjo and Mira is getting closer. Mira actually already knows if Sunjo is the wife of Myung-so, and she apparently deliberately approached Sunjo to betray her slowly from behind. On that day, Sunjo took Mira to her sister's grave. Their Sunjo, who did not want Mira to have the same fate as her sister, then strengthened Mira and said that Mira had to defend the man, and Mira had to snatch him so that Mira could become his legal wife. That night was Sunjo's birthday. As a gift, Myung-so gave a limited edition necklace from the Victoria collection that had not yet been released on the market. That night, instead of making out with his birthday wife, Myung-so went to sleep at Mira's house. After making out for a long time, Myung-so then gave a bracelet with the same serial number as Sunjo's necklace. The similarity between the necklace and the bracelet was noticed by one of the women at the Queen's Club, and it was enough to make Sunjo surprised considering that her husband said that the Victoria jewelry collection had not been released on the market. In order to confirm her suspicions on the same day, Sunjo immediately borrowed Myra's bracelet and immediately checked the design of the bracelet to the designer at the Lauren company, but unfortunately because Mira had previously removed several parts of the bracelet, as a result the designer could not find similarities between the bracelet and the necklace. After returning from there, Mira was intercepted by her uncle named Yongguk, told that Yongguk had previously worked with Myungso and now Yongguk urged Mira to be able to show Myungso to want to work together again, and if Mira failed then Yongguk would expose the affair carried out by Mira with Myungso. Due to this pressure Mira walked chaotically until she was almost hit, but fortunately Sunjo came at the right time. On another day, Sunjo went to the airport to pick up the return of her younger brother, Jungwon. There they accidentally met a doctor named Dr. Cha, told that Dr. Cha used to be a close friend of Sunjo. In fact they were almost dating. As a souvenir Jungwon gave a typical Italian wine to Sunjo, who now has Mira as her true friend, then plans to enjoy the wine together at Myra's apartment.
차 두고 걸어왔잖아.
그럼요. 언제든 환영이죠.
우리가
After a late night, Sunjo who was about to go home was surprised by the arrival of Myungso's car which entered the parking lot of Myra's apartment. Seeing this incident, Sunjo then turned around and returned to confirm her suspicions, until when she was about to knock on Myra's house, Sunjo was unable and undid her intention. Inside the house Mira and Myungso were seen making out. After finishing Myungso who had just returned home was immediately confronted with questions from Sunjo who asked about Myra's bracelet. Armed with the science of infidelity that had been mastered by Myungso, Myungso could easily answer and convince Sunjo if he had nothing to do with the bracelet. The next day Jungwon was appointed head of the design team, while Myungso was lured into the position of executive president. The executive president is the second highest position after Mrs. Kim, but before that Myungso must first resolve share issues with Chinese investors. At the same time, Sunjo, who did not sleep because she thought about what happened last night, decided to go to Myra's house without dressing up beforehand. When she arrived there, Sunjo immediately borrowed Myra's jewelry and makeup because she did not have time to make up herself, until when she looked around the contents in Myra's room. Sunjo was again surprised when she saw Myra's perfume was the same as Myungso's favorite perfume, but fortunately all suspicions were immediately broken by the arrival of a man who had been hired by Mira to pretend to be her boyfriend. After seeing that in the end Sunjo could go home in a calm condition.
수고하셨어요.
언제라도 문자만 주십시오.
Long story short, now Myungso has managed to convince Chinese investors to cooperate with the Lauren industry. In accordance with Mrs. Kim's promise an event was held to inaugurate Myungso's position. At the same time Myra's uncle threatened her again if Mira could not persuade Myungso tonight, then the uncle would expose the affair between Mira and Myungso. Hearing the serious threat from her uncle, that night Mira was desperate to meet Myungso at the event being held by the industrial Lauren company. Myra's presence there was of course realized directly by Myungso who immediately went to catch up with her. Sunjo who saw the strange behavior of her husband then immediately followed him, until on a fire escape Sunjo had to witness a heartbreaking scene that she had never imagined before. After seeing the heartbreaking incident, Sunjo tried as hard as possible to keep smiling to hide the big wound in her heart. After the event was over Myungso went to Myra's house and lied to Sunjo, saying that he would not go home because he would meet clients outside the city. After making out with Mira, when leaving the house Myungso was surprised by the presence of Sunjo who came to pick him up. Sunjo drove the car recklessly until at an intersection Sunjo who could no longer stand it was frank if she had found out everything.
쩍 봤어 침식이 너희 둘. 그 말을 나더러 믿으라는 거야?
성주야.
The next day, Sunjo, who was already disappointed, asked for a divorce from Myungso, but Myungso refused the divorce because he did not want to see his children become orphans. After considering the future of her children, Sunjo decided not to divorce with Myungso and she requested that Myungso leave Mira as soon as possible, and if he did not leave Mira then Sunjo would tell her mother so that Myungso lost the position he had just gotten. Hearing the threat, that night Myungso immediately went to Myra's house to break off the relationship, but upon arrival Myungso was surprised because it turned out that Mira was now pregnant with Myungso's child. After that, Sunjo met Mira again. On the way Sunjo, who could not stand it anymore, told Mira to break off her relationship with Myung-soo, but Mira, who did not want her efforts to be in vain, then emphasized that she would remain the queen in Myung-soo's heart, because now Mira is pregnant with Myung-soo's child. Hearing the news immediately, Sunjo was shocked. Even as a result of the incident, their car had a pretty hard accident incident. Mira and Sunjo were rushed to the hospital. From the accident incident, Sunjo fortunately suffered minor injuries that allowed her to go home faster, while Mira suffered a hard impact on her body which made the child in her womb miscarry. While Mira was in the hospital, Myung-soo never visited her because now Sunjo has taken full control of Myung-soo's life. Sunjo finally got a hope when the hospital told her that Mira had miscarried due to an accident that Mira had experienced. Knowing the news, Sunjo immediately urged Myung-soo to break off his relationship with Mira, because now Mira had miscarried and there was no more reason for Myung-soo to stay in a relationship with her. For fear of the next day, Myung-soo was forced to break up with Mira.
하기 이제 없잖아.
주가 일부러 사고 낸 거야.
Since that incident, the days have passed, until one day Jungwon came to Sunjo's house with his new girlfriend, and it turned out that Jungwon's girlfriend was Mira, who deliberately approached Jungwon to make Sunjo suffer. Long story short, on the anniversary of her sister's death, Sunjo told Jungwon the background of Mira, who was a mistress. Sunjo deliberately said that so that Jungwon was ill-feeling and decided on Mira, but the reality turned around because it turned out that Jungwon, who was the son of an affair committed by Sunjo's father, was even more concerned about Mira, and thought that an illegitimate child seemed to be very suitable for the fate that Mira had experienced. After the incident, Sunjo finally approved the relationship between Jungwon and Mira. She even gave a house certificate. The house given to Jungwon was very close to Sunjo's house. It was deliberately done by Sunjo so that she could easily supervise Mira and not return to communication with her husband. Mira actually deliberately approached Jungwon so that she could date Myung-soo again, but because Sunjo approved of her relationship with Jungwon, now she must be forced to pretend to be happy in front of Jungwon. When Mrs. Kim invites her family to vacation together, and of course Mira comes along as Jungwon's girlfriend, that night the sleepless Myung-soo decides to take a walk to enjoy the fresh air, but unfortunately he sees a scene that makes him quite jealous. Mira, who knows that now Myung-soo is very jealous, she deliberately came to tempt Myung-soo to want to restart their broken love story. Myung-soo, who really loves Mira's body, then agreed to that. Elsewhere, Sunjo was looking for the whereabouts of Myung-soo, who suddenly disappeared. When she opened a hut, Sunjo was very surprised because there was her husband with Mira who was making out. After the events of that night, Sunjo was again determined to divorce with Myung-soo. Sunjo also told Myung-soo to resign from his current position, before she told her mother about the facts that Myung-soo had done. Sunjo really wanted to remove Myung-soo from his position. She deliberately met Mira and offered her a deal. The first deal, Mira had to decide on Jungwon, and the second deal, Mira had to get evidence of product counterfeiting that had been done by Myung-soo, and after that Sunjo would give Myung-soo completely to be owned by Mira. In the evening, Mira really agreed to her deal with Sunjo. Mira also rejected the proposal from Jungwon, which made her relationship break up instantly. Not only that, Mira even immediately asked her uncle to provide a transaction made by the Lauren company and her uncle's factory 2 years ago, because in that transaction Myung-soo had been proven to be corrupt, but unfortunately what Mira did was not to comply with Sunjo's request, but she is now allied with Myung-soo to get rid of Mrs. Kim. One day when Mrs. Kim was gathering with her 2 children, they were shocked by news that told them that Sunjo's father was found dead as a beggar in Canada. Even though her husband had cheated on her and ran away, Mrs. Kim was still sad and planned to go to Canada to bring her husband's body home. Hearing that the mother would leave, Sunjo, who knew Myung-soo's evil plan, then took the initiative to fill Mrs. Kim's position, so that Myung-soo could not act as he pleased. Sunjo's fears turned out to be true, because shortly after Mrs. Kim's departure, Myung-soo held an impromptu meeting with shareholders. At the meeting, Myung-soo proposed to sell Lauren shares and the money would be used by the company to create a new innovation. The proposal was initially met with opposition from the investors, but after Myung-soo's people spoke, everyone almost agreed to Myung-soo's proposal, until when the plan was to be formalized, Sunjo came as chairman replacing Mrs. Kim. Sunjo's arrival of course thwarted all the plans from Myung-soo. A sense of humiliation by his own wife made Myung-soo, who was crazy for office, then legalize all means. This time he ordered all laborers in the Philippines to protest and strike until the time that Myung-soo had determined. Myung-soo also ordered his men to spread gossip in the stock market about Lauren's shares that had dropped dramatically, and after the news went viral, Myung-soo would buy Lauren's shares at a low price. It makes Sunjo dizzy in dealing with all the problems that have occurred in the company. She even forgot to buy medicine for Taehi. Sunjo also forgot to celebrate Taehyung's birthday, which made her two children disappointed in his mother. Because of stress, Sunjo also consulted visiting Dr. Cha as a friend who understands all the problems.
외들 의사가 있어서 좀 물어봤어.
이렇게 무능한 줄 몰랐어.
아니 천하의 한손주한테.
자영은 뿐이네.
Now the demonstrations and strikes of workers at the Philippine factory are getting worse. Whatever negotiations are carried out by the company have never been accepted by the workers. They even threaten to close the factory in the Philippines forever. It will indeed be very impossible to be handled by Sunjo because every effort made is always caught by Myung-soo. After all this time, Mrs. Kim finally returned to Korea with the ashes of her husband's body. On the day of the funeral, there was suddenly a crying woman claiming to be the wife of Mrs. Kim's husband. The woman was the affair of Sunjo's father and the biological mother of Jungwon. Seeing the incident, immediately Myung-soo's evil thoughts reappeared. He brought Jungwon to meet his biological mother, even to make Jungwon now on Myung-soo's side. One night when Sunjo was thinking about everything that was now happening, Myung-soo came by saying honestly if he actually married Sunjo just to get the Lauren company, and now henceforth he would sleep at Myra's house.
이제 그만 쉬시게 하는 게 낫지 않겠어?
자식된 둘이.
노릇할 만큼 했다고 생각하는데.
Long story short, in the end Sunjo gave up. She gave all the company's problems to Myung-soo and she would return to taking care of and raising her two children. With the change of position, Myung-soo also managed to overcome the factory problems in the Philippines. Even Jungwon, who is now very close to Myung-soo, recognizes Myung-soo's intelligence and performance. Besides that, Myung-soo also hired Mira as director at the Lauren Art Gallery. Knowing the news that Mira has now entered the company, of course Sunjo is emotional, because now her husband has really acted as he pleases. Instead of the good news that Sunjo received, Myung-soo invited Sunjo to live in harmony with Mira as his second wife. In addition, Mira and Dr. Cha turned out to have made an alliance. They agreed to destroy the Sunjo household so that Myung-soo could be fully owned by Mira, and Sunjo could be owned by Dr. Cha, who had been putting his love for Sunjo. Long story short, after officially becoming art director at the Lauren Company, Mira, who wanted to contribute, took the initiative to hold an exhibition at the Queen's Club, but unfortunately on the day the exhibition was held, none of the Queen's Club members attended the event. The socialite ladies at the club instead chose to attend a seminar held by Sunjo, and that of course made Mira very furious with Sunjo. To avenge her revenge, that same afternoon Mira came to Sunjo's house and forced Myung-soo to want to kiss Mira at that moment, and it turned out that Mira deliberately did so that Myung-soo's daughter saw the infidelity committed by her father. When Sunjo came home, she saw Taehi crying outside. Not a word came out of Taehi's mouth, which showed that now Taehi's mentality was completely destroyed by Mira. Since that day, Taehi now chooses to avoid his mother and looks like he really hates Sunjo. Not only that, the only brother she has now completely left her and chose to work with Myung-soo. To calm her mind from the increasingly complicated problems, Sunjo went to Dr. Cha's house to sit in a chair made by Dr. Cha, but unfortunately instead of the calm she got, Sunjo was even more disappointed by the fact, if Dr. Cha, who Sunjo considered her true friend, had stabbed her in the back. Dr. Cha was caught discussing the next plan, which he and Mira will run to completely destroy the Sunjo household. For the fact she has known that after Mira left, Sunjo immediately urged Dr. Cha to explain everything. Dr. Cha said if he deliberately did it all because he could no longer stand to see Sunjo always crying, and he swore he would make Sunjo happy again when Sunjo wanted to become his legal wife later. But no matter how strong the alibi that Dr. Cha made, Sunjo would no longer believe, and he also would not want to see Dr. Cha again. After returning from Dr. Cha's house, Jungwon was frank with Sunjo if he deliberately approached Myung-soo to find out the real plan to be carried out by Myung-soo. Even one night Taehi invited Mira to dinner with his family. At the dinner event, Taehi deliberately humiliated Mira by giving French food, and Mira did not know how to eat the food. Taehi and Taehyung also deliberately heated up Mira by saying some of the romance and sacrifices that Myung-soo had made for Sunjo. Feeling humiliated by the two Myung-soo children, Mira chose to leave immediately without seeing Myung-soo before. As a result of the events of that night, on the next day Mira urged Myung-so to marry her legally immediately, but because now Myung-so has not been able to fully control the Lauren company, he again cannot give a definite answer. In order for all their dreams to be realized immediately, Myung-so told Mira to make a plan that could get rid of Mrs. Kim forever. After thinking for a long time, Mira finally made a slander by accusing Mrs. Kim of having corrupted a number of funds from several collections in the Lauren Art Gallery. At the same time, Mrs. Kim finally found out all the infidelity that had been done by Myung-so. From her assistant, Mrs. Kim also found out if Myung-so now served as interim chairman. Feeling disgusted with the behavior of her son-in-law, the next day Mrs. Kim returned to duty. She also fired Myung-so from the Lauren company, but all in vain because at that time the police came to arrest Mrs. Kim on charges of embezzlement of funds.
자금을 세탁한 게 사실입니까?
저 김강임은 불미스온일에 연루되어서 성실히 임하도록 하겠습니다.
While elsewhere, Tae-hee finally told Sunjo if he had seen his father kissing with Mira in Sunjo's room. Hearing that, of course, Sunjo was even more devastated because her husband had dared to commit immorality in the room where Sunjo was most comfortable. At the same time as usual, Myung-so and Mira were celebrating their victory by making out. The next day Sunjo made food for her husband. Even she also suddenly became friendly, as if she had given up if her love was divided in two. Seeing the drastic changes that his wife did, of course Myung-so was suspicious, but Sunjo said if she was already sincere, if Myung-so would marry again. To prove all of Sunjo's words with force, she also making out with her husband. Behind Sunjo's changing attitude, Sunjo has other plans. She went to a number of shoe factories and gave Lauren shoe designs. Sunjo also requested that Victoria's shoe knockoffs be sold in various cheap markets in all countries in the world, so that the image and self-esteem of the shoes dropped drastically.
회사 부대인 거죠.
알겠습니다.
The plan carried out by Sunjo was very effective, because shortly after the incident the Lauren company, which is now led by Myung-so, was made nervous over the allegations of counterfeit goods. All the artificial shoes were immediately brought by Myung-so to Mira's presence. Considering that only Mira was the one who had the design of all the shoes, Myung-so also suspected that Mira deliberately leaked the design for personal gain. As a sense of pride for the shoes she designed herself, Mira wore Victoria's shoes to gather with members of the Queen's Club. There, instead of getting praise, Mira instead got blasphemy from all members who considered Victoria's shoes to be cheap goods. Mira, who did not want to lose prestige, then said that the shoes she was wearing were original, but unfortunately, according to the mothers there, both original and fake, everything depends on the wearer. It could be that the shoes were fake but claimed to be the original shoes. At the same time, Myung-so, who just returned home, got a hard slap. At that time Tae-hee was frank if she had known the affair committed by her father. She also added if she had seen directly if Myung-so kissed with Mira. In a different place, Sunjo came to Mira, saying that she would not divorce Myung-so, and she chose to live in harmony with Mira as the second wife of Myung-so. Hearing that, of course, Mira laughed because Sunjo was more sincere about being a desert than letting go of Myung-so. Not to be outdone, Sunjo replied to Mira's words by saying that Mira would forever be known as the usurper of people's husbands, and Mira's children would be labeled as illegitimate children forever. At the end of the meeting, Sunjo gave a summons from the court to Mira, because Mira was the director of the Lauren Art Gallery, who certainly knew all the ins and outs of the false report that befell Mrs. Kim. Receiving a summons from the court, Mira, who was afraid of being jailed, of course reported to Myung-so, and Myung-so told Mira to run away and hide in America, because if Mira was found guilty, not only Mira would be jailed, but Myung-so would also lose everything. On that day, Mira pretended to go to America. She also changed her cell phone number so that Myung-so would believe that Mira had indeed left. Mira then met Dr. Cha and invited him to return to work together, because now the ace card that she had would be used. In short, 1 week has passed, and today is the anniversary of Sunjo and Myung-so's wedding. On that day, Mira, who will use her last plan, is preparing to attend Sunjo and Myung-so's wedding anniversary. The anniversary party was held in the courtyard of Sunjo's house. All the family and close friends attended the party. That night Jungwon was surprised by the presence of Mira, who was already in the house. Jungwon then told Sunjo about Mira's presence. Mira's presence turned out to be a plan from Sunjo, who is now back asking for evidence of data falsification from the Lauren Art Gallery that put Mrs. Kim in prison. Mira insisted on giving the evidence after Sunjo divorced Myung-so, but Sunjo, who did not want to be deceived for the second time, again offered a deal. namely if Mira gave the evidence right now then Sunjo would come out and would announce her divorce that night too. Because the event has started, Sunjo then came out without waiting for an answer from Mira. At the event the vows and promises when they were married were read again. After the oath-taking ceremony we are shown Taehyung who tells his friend named Jungkook, if Taehyung has a very rare game collection. Taehyung's friend named Jungkook then told Taehyung to take the collection. Meanwhile at the same time Sunjo returned to the house to collect answers from Mira, but in the house she could not find Mira and instead found a knife lying on the floor. While outside during the cake-cutting ceremony everyone was shocked by the screams of Sunjo who saw Mira unconscious. From that incident Sunjo, Myungso and Jungwon were taken to the police station for questioning, while Mira, who was still breathing, was immediately rushed to the hospital. After carrying out the crime scene the police found Sunjo's fingerprints on the knife lying on the floor. Sunjo tried to defend herself by saying that the knife was a kitchen knife, so it was only natural that her fingerprints were on the knife. Sunjo's alibi was broken again by the police who found Sunjo's nail DNA on Mira's body. Then the story retreated when Sunjo offered a deal. Mira who was furious because her plan failed miserably and then went berserk which caused a fight to occur. Back to the present, the police get additional news if the width and depth of the knife found does not match the width and depth on Mira's body. It shows that the knife found by the police is not the knife used to stab Mira. Because the evidence for Sunjo is not strong in the end the police release Sunjo, but instead the police bring Taehyung as a suspect. This happened because Taehyung's friend, Jungkook, testified that before the incident Taehyung entered the house. Shortly thereafter Taehyung admitted everything he had done to the police, but the police who got the fact that the knife used was different, with the wound on Mira's body did not immediately follow up on Taehyung, and they would repeat the incident first before naming Taehyung as a suspect. That night, Sunjo could not sleep because she kept thinking about the fate of her son. For this reason, Sunjo immediately checked every corner of the house to collect some clues. Until when Sunjo entered the room where all the collections were stored, Sunjo was surprised by the storage of Victoria's shoes. There she saw a knife covered in blood wrapped in Myungso's handkerchief. At the same time Myungso was in the hospital to visit Mira. Surprisingly Myungso stopped Mira's oxygen which made Mira immediately die. After returning from the hospital, Myungso took back the knife he had hidden, and there Sunjo had kept a hidden camera. That night Sunjo also visited Mira at the hospital, but upon arrival she saw Mira who went to the hospital rooftop. Mira walked while remembering her meeting with Myungso before the incident that night. Mira plans to provide evidence of data falsification that will be able to free Mrs. Kim, and after that Sunjo will divorce Myungso. Mira invites Myungso to get married and restart his business from scratch with Mira, but Myungso who does not want to lose all the positions he has mastered then stabs Mira. There Mira planned to end her life, but luckily Sunjo managed to stop the action. The next day Myungso got the news that Mira had regained consciousness. At the hospital Mira feigned memory loss and also told the police if she deliberately stabbed herself on the grounds that she could no longer stand being a mistress. On that confession the police finally stopped Mira's case and punished Taehyung for making a false report. To cover up her acting Mira said if she still did not remember the incident last night, and she deliberately lied to the police because previously the police told her if Taehyung was the defendant as the perpetrator. On that basis Mira who did not want Taehyung in prison lied by saying stabbing herself. It is told that since the incident at home Taehyung often daydreams and often looks like a frightened person. Even one night her son finally confessed if he saw his father who had stabbed Mira. On the other side, Mira finally returned to her house, repeatedly asked Myungso about Mira's memory, but Mira could play her acting well which made Myungso finally 100% believe that Mira forgot about what happened to her. Meanwhile Sunjo is now getting evidence of data falsification and can finally free Mrs. Kim from prison. Mrs. Kim's release is of course the apocalypse for Myungso. He then immediately devised a new plan to secure his position. That night Myungso gave sleeping pills to Sunjo, and after falling asleep Myungso took fingerprints from Sunjo and attached them to the knife he used during the stabbing. The next day, Sunjo and Mira met again to discuss their next plan. Now both Sunjo and Mira have realized that their love is very sincere, but Myungso is the guilty one who has betrayed their love, making hatred flow in their blood. Sunjo told Mira to continue to pretend to be amnesic, because if Myungso finds out Mira's acting then Myungso will destroy her. At the same time, Mrs. Kim, who just breathed fresh air, received a threat from Myung-so by providing fingerprint data from Sunjo on the original knife. Myung-so will not give the evidence to the police as long as Mrs. Kim gives the Lauren company to him. Mrs. Kim immediately met Sunjo and gave the facts. Sunjo, who already had a mature plan, told Mrs. Kim to give the Lauren company, and told Mrs. Kim to wait for the time to fight back. Long story short, in the end, Myung-so has officially become the new owner of the Lauren company. On the day of the inauguration, Sunjo accompanied Myung-so as his legal wife. After the inauguration ceremony, Sunjo gave vacation tickets to Mrs. Kim and her 2 children, and told them to take a vacation while waiting for the right time to take revenge. In the evening, after keeping a hidden camera, Sunjo finally found out the code of the safe where the knife was kept. This time Sunjo took the knife and she started her plan. When the night was getting late, Myung-so, who had just returned home, saw a message on Sunjo's cell phone, on Myra's cell phone, saying that if she was the one who would finish off Myung-so. That same night, Myung-so immediately met Younggu and gave a photo of someone to Younggu killed. The meeting was heard directly by Jungwon, who had been keeping a hidden voice recorder in Younggu's office. Jungwon, who was afraid that something would happen, went straight to Younggu's office, but upon arrival he did not find their presence. Jungwon, who was afraid that Mira or Sunjo was under threat, then immediately gave a warning, but unfortunately at that time his cell phone was left behind. At the same time, Sunjo, who accidentally saw Jungwon's cell phone, saw a message from someone who told him that Myung-so would sell Lauren's company shares to a Chinese company. The message also provides a location that will be used by Myung-so for transactions. Seeing the message, of course, Sunjo was surprised and immediately went to the location listed, arriving at the location suddenly. At the same time, Myung-so, who already knew Myra's charade, then told her to end it all. Mira, who was not stupid, immediately took the lighter and said if the room was filled with gas oil that could destroy them both. Got a threat like that, Myung-so did not flinch in the slightest. He then hit Mira and said if Mira was just a doll that he used as a gratification of his lust only. After making sure Mira was dead, Myung-so immediately left Myra's house and went to the location of the transaction, but when he arrived there, suddenly Younggu betrayed him and Myung-so realized he was bound. He, who realized that Sunjo would do desperate things, then seduced Sunjo to stop the action, saying that Mira had died and Myung-so would repent and invite Sunjo to live happily like before. But at that time Mira suddenly came to kill Myung-so, choosing to do it alone because she did not want Sunjo to be imprisoned. Since the incident, Myung-so has finally officially died. While Mira had to languish in prison and was sentenced to 5 years in prison, Sunjo had offered to release Mira, but Mira refused on the grounds that she had destroyed Sunjo's life, and she chose to spend her time in prison as a ransom for the sins she had committed so far. Since that day, several years have passed. Jungwon is now a leader in the Lauren company while Taehi and Taehung are studying abroad. Long story short, Sunjo finally reunited with Mira, who is now free to breathe fresh air. They agreed to create a bond of brotherhood that could not be separated. And the movie was over, closed with a happy ending for Mira and Sunjo.